Ladies and gentlemen, welcome warmly to the panel Modern Warfare, Rethinking Security Architecture Beyond Conventional Threats. My name is Katarzyna Pisarska. I'm the chair of the Warsaw Security Forum from Poland. It's a huge pleasure for us as the forum to be co-organizers of this panel and of course a partner to the Doha Forum. And I'm delighted to introduce to you the really stellar composition of our panel to discuss this important topic. On my left, Admiral Bauer, former chair of the NATO Military Committee from 2021 and 2024, and also previously the Chief of Defense of the Netherlands. He is known for his direct communication style, and we're looking forward to hearing a lot on modern warfare for him. Rob, welcome. We also have, following a great friend of the forum, Þórdís, Gylfadóttir, who is currently the special envoy of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe on the situation of children of Ukraine. She is also the member of Parliament of Iceland and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, of Justice, and many other portfolios in her very rich political career. Þórdís, thank you very much for being with us here. We also have a local voice, very important, Dr. Abdel Ghafar, who is a scholar on Middle Eastern politics and the director of the Middle East and North Africa program at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs here in Doha. Thank you very much for being with us and hosting us here in Doha. We're looking forward to the discussion. And last but definitely not least, a seasoned Spanish diplomat, but now with NATO for many years, special representative for the southern neighborhood, but also now acting Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs and Security Policy, Javier, Colomina. Thank you very much for joining us, the panel. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to welcome you because you will be an extremely important part of this discussion. We would want to start this discussion. We would like to give you some food for thought, and then we would like to listen to you, have your questions, have your involvement into the discussion, and have it as interactive as possible. And we have 43 minutes to do so. So I'll be very, very grateful to the panelists to try to keep our answers short and crispy as well. So Admiral Bauer, let's start with you, and I think it's more of a question to all of our panelists, but to set the stage for our audience today. When we think about the security architecture that we're seeing in Europe, but also beyond, but specifically today in Europe, that goes beyond conventional threats, what are we really dealing with? What is Europe today dealing with? How do you explain to citizens what kind of security environment awaits us 2, 4, 5 years from now?
So the term widely used is hybrid warfare, and a lot of people think that is much nicer than normal warfare. But actually hybrid warfare involves arson, killing people, sabotage, destruction, poisoning, scaring people. So it's not nice at all. And the means with which governments do this is by using, I don't know, intelligence operatives. Nowadays the Russians are hiring local people very often for money and basically saying, if you set this building afire for, I don't know, 2,000 euros, then thank you. The person that does it doesn't even know it's from the Russian government. So it's a smart way. The Russian government suffered a big blow after a lot of nations expelled a lot of people from their embassies, including spies, and therefore they were short of people in a way. But for me, it's also good news. It's good news that the Russians are doing this because actually it shows that they are desperate. The fact that we are helping Ukraine, not only Europe and NATO, but 50 nations across the world help Ukraine since 2022 with weapons, with money, with all the things that they need. And basically that hurts the Russians, and therefore they go into these methods. For example, by flying around drones. It's not the start of World War III. It's a nuisance. It's not okay. but we should actually stay calm and carry on and continue with the help of Ukraine.
Thank you. I'll come back to the question of solutions, societal resilience, and so on. But let me for a moment jump actually to our NATO representative here. Could you tell our audience more about the type of practical threats that NATO is now observing? I come from a country that has not only been seeing drone attacks coming into our airspace, but are also arson coming from Russian actors, Russian sponsor actors, and finally lately almost a derailed train where hundreds could have been killed. Also an act of sabotage. The people who did it fled to Belarus. So what are you seeing across, because Poland is not an exception, it's more of a rule today. What do you see in 32 member states happening, and especially those on the European plane?
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Katarzyna. Thanks very much to the Doha Forum for the invitation. So what we see, and as a follow-up to what the Admiral said, is that clearly the most unstable, the most difficult security context we've lived in the last at least 30 years. Challenges and threats in all directions, with a 360 degrees approach, using every tool that is possible to be used, from conventional to hybrid, as I would agree very much that at the end hybrid contains everything. And the response that we are given to what we are seeing these days is actually the same kind of response that need to be used whenever you see that your adversaries are using all the toolkits to actually confront you, which is the most multi-domain responses that we could give. As you've seen probably in the news, we launched a year ago this Baltic Sentry activity, only a couple of months ago. Eastern Central activity, those are multi-domain activities that have land, air, sea-based military assets that have lots of innovation on it to actually be able to respond in the way we want to respond. At the same time, we have to be clear. What we do is basically to increase our ability to deter. We have always been very clear, we are a defensive alliance, and what we try to bring to the table is peace. Actually, we've done quite well if you look at it with a Euro-Atlantic perspective. Article 5 territory has been protected for 75 years, and we continue to do that. But it's clear that we need to modernize the way we are acting towards many of those elements, particularly the ones that we've seen being used.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if your mic is working well. Could you hear? Oh, now it's much better. Yeah, thanks.
So as I was saying, we are trying to confront those in a more modern way. It's clear that Russia particularly is using all the toolkit, and we need to be effective. The most effective way we have to respond to those threats is to contain in our response also the toolkit that all our military could bring to the table. And that's multi-domain, that's innovation, and that's very much what we've been doing in the last months with Eastern Sentry and with Baltic Sentry.
And which countries do you feel in NATO are targeted the hardest currently?
Well, I think we're all targeted. At the end, there's no alternative here. I think the whole territory is targeted. Mark Rutte has been very clear. Whatever missile could hit any Baltic country, 3 minutes later could hit Madrid or Rome. So at the end of the day, we all need to be aware. But as I said, we need to be aware, we need to be prepared, we need to take strong decisions, and that's what we're doing. The Hague has to be understood under that exact light. Because of the analysis of the security context that we did, the most difficult one in decades, we decided to take decisions to invest more, to invest better, and to collectively defend the territory and deter better than ever.
Thank you. We'll come back again to the question of solutions. I'll go to Þórdís. Þórdís, you know very well Ukraine, and it has been for the Russians a testing ground of how far you can go with both conventional warfare, but also non-conventional warfare. And you deal with the abducted Ukrainian children. Is that also a tool of war?
Absolutely. It's absolutely a tool of war. And I think for everyone to think about the effect that it has on, parents, family, basically on human beings, when your children are deliberately being abducted and stolen, to re-educate them, to brainwash them, and to indoctrinate them and send them to the front lines, where they are then supposed to fight their own countrymen who are sacrificing their lives to procure and basically to protect the freedom of those same children. And if we just start to imagine what would I be ready to do, sacrifice, to get my children back. So that is obviously a tool of war. And in that regard, I think it is important for us to try to understand. You don't have to be a lawyer or a geopolitical expert to understand this. You just have to be a father or a mother, or remember when you were a child and you needed your parents. You basically just have to be human being to understand how fundamentally wrong it is to steal other people's children, and the effect that it has on a society.
Thank you. Adel, if I can ask you, bringing in a Middle East perspective, how would you say, these Europe's recent hybrid crisis, what kind of lessons do you see from these for the Middle East? And what are the perspectives from here on what's going on currently in Europe, a war that is obviously spilling over in so many different ways?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on this panel, and I would say that hybrid warfare is not new to the Middle East. We've seen over the past decades non-state actors increasingly operating with the state tactics. We've seen state actors operating with hybrid tactics, and there's actually lots of similarities, I would say, with some of the actions of Russia in Ukraine, with the actions of Israel here, the disproportionate use of force in Gaza. We've had the ongoing war. We've had destructions of hospitals, civilian infrastructure, and just to build up on what my colleague here was speaking about children, 30,000 dead children, and all of this is happening in real time, and the world was unable to stop it. We currently have a ceasefire, but unfortunately the ceasefire has not been holding as it should be. But I think that more broadly, when we look at what's happening in Ukraine, a lot of people empathize and sympathize with what's happening, but there's also a perception that there's a bit of a double standard when it comes to what's happening in Gaza. A war crime in Mariupol is a war crime in Gaza. We can't treat them differently, and the international system has to operate this way, otherwise we won't have an international system. So if we're going to push for an international system to work in Russia and Ukraine, it has to work for us here, this side of the world as well.
Thank you, and thank you for putting that forward, because some of us just participated a moment ago in the previous panel on the Ukraine and the peace deal of Ukraine, and I think the takeaway was, this is the Ukrainian speaker who said, now we live in a world where it is the law of power and not the power of the law, and that the Pandora box has been opened with the invasion of Ukraine, with the earlier 2014 annexation of Crimea, naturally, but we're now seeing, nuclear powers being able to invade, take over, and what do countries such as Qatar or others, how can they in this new system survive in the future? So my question maybe here to Rob, to Admiral Bauer is, how is it at all possible at this point in time to restore a world order? Where would we start even? What would have to happen, do you think, for us to rebuild confidence that law will still apply, international law will still apply, and of course, what kind of consequences would a bad deal in Ukraine have for international law? I know a lot of it, but we can share that question.
Yeah. It should be about a safe peace deal. It should be a deal that is actually lasting and that is fair for Ukraine that was attacked. So there's a lot of talk from a number of nations about the role of the UN, for example, also in this last panel that we attended. At the same time, we basically see that the system is broken. And the UN is unable to act, basically, because a number of the permanent members are blocking any decision on Ukraine, and therefore the UN Security Council is basically powerless when it comes to Ukraine. And that is sad, but it is a reality. And I think if we're not careful, we will see in 5 to 10 years 2 parallel systems in the world. We're actually not one international rules-based order under the UN, but 2 parallel systems. One is probably Europe, North America, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. It's going to be interesting what India is going to do. And they basically will have the rules we see as the global rules now. And then there is, let's say, BRICS, where people want a different system. They want a set of rules, I think, but they want a different set of rules. And therefore it has huge implications, not only for governments, but also for businesses, where they actually have to think about in which system do I want to and can I do business? Because there will be different legal systems, there will be different monetary systems, and so we will see the world in that sense, I think, split up into.
Þórdís, what do you think regarding a just or non-unjust peace in Ukraine? Could you explain to our audience, what you're seeing currently, both in terms of the negotiations ongoing between the US and Russia, and of course how the Ukrainians and the Europeans are responding to things that are sometimes discussed over our heads?
Yes, well, I think it is, even though the developments are ongoing, I think it's important to remind ourselves that the starting point of all discussions should always be, well, there is one simple solution, which is that Russia could actually go back home. Then the war is over. They could return the children that they have unlawfully abducted. They could pay for the destruction that they've done and made in Ukraine. But I also know, I'm not naive, I also know that there's no will to do that. So for a just and lasting peace, that means that Ukraine has to be able to defend itself. When people talk about security guarantees, I mean, they had security guarantees. And then we saw full war of aggression, full-scale invasion. So I understand that it is, not very, people don't have a lot of confidence in when they talk about security guarantees, but they are important. For a just peace, you cannot talk about a just peace and, for example, leave out the unlawfully abducted children. How is that possible? And I think it's important for everyone, just like Admiral Bauer mentioned, with regards to the interests and all the other things. I mean, what Russia is doing now, we should maybe just call the consequences of that is a Russia tax. If we live in a world where there is no rule-based order, we will have implications and very different world, also when it comes to international business, global trade. And so even though the consequences and the effect is different between regions, everyone is on that boat, whether we like it or not. So there has to be rule-based order. And there has to be, in Ukraine, there has to be a just and sustainable peace, which means that it has to be fair. And the Ukrainian society will have to be allowed to decide and to be fully sovereign and independent. We cannot change international recognized borders by force. That's bad news for everyone. And we should not, for the Ukrainian nation, this is not only about the internationally recognized borders. It is also about being sovereign and independent and being able to make decisions for their own people, their own future, and to become the society that they have already chosen, that they want to become. And those are about values, and that is actually what scares the Russian Federation. So sometimes when people say, oh, you with your values, be realistic. Well, I'm realistic when I say that that's actually what scares them. That the Ukrainian nation is fully sovereign and free, and that they can pursue, increased prosperity, rule of law, democracy, and so forth.
And they no longer want to be a Russian colony.
Well, they are
have the
actually
right
ready to die for that, you know, every day, because they don't wanna do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Javier, I see you have thoughts on that, please.
Yes, absolutely. I think, I mean, I could agree with everything that was said before, but at the same time, I think it's a moment where we have to leave space for negotiators to negotiate. I think we have to keep in mind that if we don't change anything, any of the factors, the result of the equation will continue to be the same. And we have decided not to be part of the war. We have decided to help as much as possible the Ukrainians, and that's what we are doing. NATO particularly, we've been instrumental in everything that is happening in how we support Ukraine, from the Pearl to NSATU to the Comprehensive Assistance Plan to everything that we are driving to help the Ukrainians. But at the end of the day, we see what's going on right now. And unless we change those factors, the result of the equation will continue to be the same. And the result of the equation means that 10 to 15,000 Ukrainians per month are being killed or injured. If we just say once and again that the principles that are essential for us are red lines for all of us, and we don't change the factors of the equation, we basically moving into a conflict that will be even longer and more difficult for the Ukrainians. So I think at this stage, where we have a peace process that is ongoing, where are there negotiations that are ongoing, the difficult decisions to be taken are decisions that have to be taken with space for the Ukrainians. I don't think we help that much if we continue to mention the principles that we, of course, are given a lot of importance
I'm hearing
to.
here not for Ukrainians, but by Ukrainians.
Absolutely.
There's a big difference, I think.
And I mean, I don't think we're suspicious. We've been doing everything in our power to help the Ukrainians. But as I often say when I give lectures, it's quite easy to talk about the war in Ukraine and about the principles when we are having a conversation here in Doha and then having a coffee outside. It's a bit more difficult when you are in Ukraine and you've seen 10 to 15,000 people dying every month for the last 4 years. So I think there is an opportunity for peace. It's going to be difficult. There will be a need to make concessions, and we need to give as much space as possible to the negotiators and to the Ukrainians to decide what they want to do. And if what they want to do is actually to take on some of those principles, that's for them to decide, and not for Europeans to decide on that, because as I said, it's not Europeans that are being killed, it's Ukrainians that are also Europeans.
Yes, sorry, a two-finger here for Rob.
So to add what my colleague here said, on the Russians, if the Russians stop the war today, pack their gear and go home, the war is over. And she said it's unlikely. I agree with her. If the Ukrainians stop the war today, they have lost their country. That's the difference. It's not a war on equal footing. They didn't start the war, the Russians started the war. If the Ukrainians stop the war, they've lost their country, they've lost their language, they've lost their culture. I think that is something we have to understand. And if everybody's talking about the number of Ukrainians dying, it is amazing that the Ukrainians are still saying to their political leaders, continue the fight. Because that's the reality. And everyone else can say it should stop, and I agree in general, but if the Ukrainians themselves decide to fight for what they find important, and that is actually the continuation of their nation, then we have to respect that as well, and we have to continue to help them.
Mm-hmm. Adel, with the fantastic negotiation skills that the state of Qatar has, do you think you can convince the Russians to move out back home from Ukraine?
I think there's a closed session on that tomorrow, so I can update you.
Can I attend?
But yeah, I just want to reflect on the earlier comment, like all of this is music to my ear, humanitarian law, international law, dead and so on. But when it comes to our side of the world, it seems it doesn't really apply.
We hear you.
I just have to say, sitting between all of these Europeans colleagues, it's great to hear that. You know, so over
We're on the
over
same
the
side
summer
here.
Oh yeah, I know, I agree with you. So, but over the summer, Israel attacked Qatar, it attacked Syria, it attacked Lebanon, it attacked Tunisia, it attacked Yemen. We have a rogue state that is operating outside of international norms within our region. If you look at Russia, it's Russia, Ukraine. Israel here is just operating across the region.
Well, the Russians are now operating across.
So that's our first point. And I think second point, nobody's against peace. I'm Egyptian, by the way. So we grew up with the peace treaty with Israel. It's a cornerstone of stability since 1979 in our region and so on. But the Israel of 1979 is very different from the Israel of now. And if we want to compare the peace plans that are put on the table by the Americans for Ukraine and for Gaza, it's very interesting. You know, so on the Palestinian one, the Palestinians have already accepted a demilitarized state, loss of sovereignty from step one, and even then it's not acceptable. For the Ukrainians, a reduction in the armed forces from 700,000 to 600,000, infringement on sovereignty. You know, so we're talking about two different worlds completely here, and I think for something to be successful, these worlds have to merge together, and the rules should apply for everyone.
Thank you very much. Very important voice. I think I agree. As I said, I promised to bring in different voices here. So I see a number of questions. Oh, a lot of questions. Oh, we're going to have a lot of fun. Okay, so I'll start. The ambassador here, the lady, and then the two ladies. If we can pass, and if it's okay with you, we'll take 3 questions at a time. Yes, and please ask the question.
Pani Katarzyna.
Bardzo proszę, zawsze do pomocy.
I have just one question. I have heard that Ukrainians, which are the victims, have made difficult decision, and no one had in mind, and no one said that Russians had to make decisions. Why? Is it much more convenient for the partners, for Europeans, to push the victim, not the aggressor? This is a question to you, Mr. Colomina.
Thank you. That's the first question. Then we'll take the lady in pink. Beautiful color.
Hi. My question is not about Ukraine. My question is about the title of this session, Modern Warfare. Could you please tell us, in your experience, you're talking about rethinking security architecture beyond conventional threats. How did technology change modern warfare? I mean, what kind of role drones have been playing, electronic, all kinds of cyber, whatever, changing. The second question is, you cannot anymore talk about modern warfare without talking about space as a war fighting domain. Could you please tell us what you're thinking, especially the panel is Europe heavy, what's the European thinking about that? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. We already have a volunteer. Admiral Bauer promised he'll answer the questions. Yes, please. The lady here in the 4th row, I think. And then we'll go back to questions, and then we'll go back to the panel, and then I'll take questions from this side of the audience. Promise.
Thank you. So you mentioned the world being split kind of between US, EU, and allies, and then sort of the BRICS countries. How do you think the change recently in US foreign policy and the split we've seen between the US and some of the EU countries will influence this? And do you think this leads to possibly a further split then between this kind of US and European bloc that you're talking about? Thank you.
Very good question, very close to our hearts. So let's start with Javier. I think the first question goes to you from the Ukrainian ambassador, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador. I think it's been very clear in the 4 last years that we have put every possible pressure on Russia and none on Ukraine from our side. I think if there is a good friend of Ukraine here, it's NATO. We've been doing everything in our power, and we continue to do everything in our power. But for the negotiations, the Russians, of course, will have to take decisions, but I'm not going to put ever on the same footing the two sides of the war. One is an aggressor, one is an invader, one is a threat for NATO, one is just an adversary, it's a very simple equation for us, and the other one is a friend and a member of the European community, which is Ukraine. I just said that the negotiations will be difficult, and we need to give space to the negotiators, and the negotiators are being led by Ukrainians. That's what we've been trying. We've been conveying message after message to our American friends, to have particularly the Ukrainians in the lead of the negotiations. I think that is what is happening these days, with Umerov being in Florida, first in Geneva and then in Florida. And what we know is that in any negotiation, at the end, there's difficult decisions to be taken. We will continue to support the Ukrainians as much as needed and as much as we can. And actually, as we speak, we continue to raise money and resources through NSATU and through Pearl. So we continue to believe that the best possible chance for a negotiation is for the Ukrainians to be strong in the battlefield. But at the end of the day, a negotiation is a negotiation, and I think that at this stage, where I think there is an opportunity for peace, and that's what your own president has been saying lately, it is a moment where negotiators need to have space to negotiate. We will continue at the same time, as I said. We had a ministerial last week. We took decisions to continue to support Ukraine. We have been raising more than $3 billion on Pearl in the last 4 months on military equipment that we've been sending to Ukraine. So our role is clear here. But the negotiation is a negotiation, and we just need to give space and autonomy for negotiators to negotiate, particularly for the Ukrainians.
Yeah. Javier, and if the negotiations collapse, what will you recommend the NATO Secretary General and the member states, most importantly, to do?
Well, that's a very easy answer, because it's exactly what we are doing and we will be continue doing, which is to support Ukraine to continue with sanctions, to continue with military equipment. But I want to be very clear. We haven't stopped any of that. We continue to deliver military equipment. We continue to impose sanctions bilaterally, not NATO. We continue to support Ukraine, but because we believe that the stronger Ukraine is on the battlefield, the better the chances are for a negotiation. But right now, there is a negotiation going on, thanks to the strong push from the Americans. And I think we need to give some space. And the space we are giving, NATO, is by supporting the Ukrainians as much as possible. And the plea to allies and partners to support Ukraine continues to be there. One of the reasons I'm here in the region is actually to also talk with our partners in the region for them also to continue to support Ukraine.
Thank you. And I think, I think we all know what we're talking about. We're all upset that more pressure is put on Ukraine, and I think that than it is on the aggressor, and that is something we need to continue to point out. Admiral Bauer, so question number 2. So, the technology of actually this unconventional threats, including space, yes? Where are we here? And if you could answer that question.
For the ambassador, by the way, it's not NATO that is negotiating the peace deal, it is the US. So it's not the same. So that's not the same.
There's a young Trump tomorrow. We can ask the question tomorrow.
But technology and the change of warfare. First and foremost, everybody thinks warfare is changing because of drones. And that's fascinating. And in the history, there's been many changes in terms of technology. It's fascinating to see that this war is a combination of World War I, World War II, and the 21st century. Trench warfare is back, the use of infantry soldiers, huge number of killings. We're talking more than 1 million on the Russian side, wounded and killed soldiers. These are enormous numbers, and that is very old-fashioned. That's World War I. And at the same time, we see hypersonics, AI, drones, we see the use of cyber, we see the use of space. All this is happening at the same time. Now, people say the use of tanks tanks are no longer useful. I think that's wrong. That's not the right conclusion. Because if you see a film where there's a Russian tank driving with an open hedge, and a drone drops a bomb inside the tank, then actually the tank has been used the wrong way. They should have closed the hatch, because actually a tank can withstand quite an explosion. That's why it is armored. So
that's why it's a tank.
That's why it's a tank. But they've been used in the wrong way. Now, if you look at the war in Ukraine, it is primarily a land war. It's not a multi-domain war. Little bit of use of Air Force in the beginning only of the war, and thereafter basically it's a land war. And that's why the Ukrainians started to use the drones, because they didn't have enough aircraft, they didn't have enough air power, and basically then the use of drones have led to the point where you can't hide anymore. So hiding is no longer possible. The whole front line is invaded by drones from both sides. Everybody knows basically where the other is. And then drones are used to kill soldiers individually using AI to recognize vehicles, etc. So AI is much more the change for me than the drones themselves. The large number of drones is an issue, of course. And what we see is that we have to think about a different balance of high-end, high-tech, very expensive weapons that take a very long time to produce, like F-35s and nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers and tanks. And at the same time, you have these cheap drones that can cause a lot of destruction. So we need to find weapons against those cheap threats. And I think we can if we focus. I think we can if we focus. And of course, space has been part of the war. I think the use of commercial space more and more is interesting to see. Where actually Elon Musk helped the Ukrainians with the communications, with his satellites. But then at the same time, the very interesting fact that he stopped the transmission of his satellites when he didn't agree with the target of the Ukrainians gives you to think how far can you actually outsource these sorts of things as a government. Because if you use civilian technology and then on the civilian side somebody says I don't like it and then I switch off the satellites, that's a strange thing, but it happened. So we will see more and more a combination of civilian, so private enterprises and the government. We will see more use of space. We see more and more low orbit spacecraft in large numbers, which helps in communication and all these things. So I think it will continue to be a combination of, let's say, traditional weapon systems and the nuke technology.
And to the both of our panelists, the third question, US, Europe, because of course in Europe, the United States has been for decades a stabilizing force. It might have a completely mixed role here in the Middle East, but for Europeans, and especially countries such as Poland that came out of communism, that after the Cold War, the Americans were the security guarantees. What's happening now in your understanding, both you, Þórdís, and Abdel, on the European-American dynamics these days?
Well, if I may, just 1 minute on the question on technology, because just to add a bit, not related to space, but just on the information war. I think it is important for us to understand that we have 3 different kinds of wars going on, and one of them is information war. And there, people say when it's convenient, they talk about freedom of expression or free speech. But the role of, for example, bots, basically to spread lies, hate, fear, fake news all around, is to make people afraid, angry, and to undermine the societies from within. And the biggest players in that regard are actually doing an excellent job. And it is important for us to understand what is happening and hopefully find some ways to counter that, because freedom of expression is a fundamental human right. Human rights are actually for human beings. They are not for bots. So it's not that we cannot do anything when it comes to that part of the war. With regards to the United States, I think we are obviously living critical times. That has happened before, that will happen again. But that's where we are living now. And we all bear a big responsibility. And what I can say is that, the Declaration of Independence will be 250 years old next year. I think they will, I hope that they will make a big deal out of that. And what I can say is that I do believe in the people of the United States. I do believe in the DNA of the United States, where they have had flawed, like all of us, but a strong history of democracy, and like you mentioned, the interest and the stability, security of basically the transatlantic relationship is very interconnected and intertwined, and I can only hope that that will, continue that way. But of course, we hear the worries and questions from
Thank
a
you.
lot of countries in
Very
Europe.
important. Yes, Abdel,
Thank you.
to that.
I just, maybe to respond to a question, but I want to also comment on the earlier point about BRICS. Minor disagreement. I don't think BRICS is a separate world and there's going to be two worlds. I think what we're moving towards is the sort of the rise of the global south and the global south countries wanting to have bigger say in global multilateral institutions, and also perhaps have their own institutions, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and so on. I think this is all part and parcel of the rise of middle powers, South Korea, Indonesia, all of these kinds. I think the world is changing, and we have to adapt to it. And part of that change also, which goes back to the question, is the retreating role of the US globally, the US from now 50 years, 100 years. And this puts impetus on Europe and the Middle East to invest in their own security architecture, invest in solving their own problems, and not look at it, the US is retrenching, withdrawing, what are we going to do? It's more like it puts the impetus on regional actors to try and find regional solutions for problems.
Thank you very much. And I promised 2 more questions. There was a lady there, I promised, so if we can take that. And the 2 ladies, I'm sorry. The first, and here and there. If we could ask for the mics. Microphones. I can give mine, but that will be a very risky thing to do. Yeah, I'll come to you. Can I stop? Yes? Is this on? Yes, it's on. Yeah. We have 5 minutes.
Only comment for 1 minute.
Yes. Thank you. And
I will read it because I write it just now.
Yes, but really 1 minute,
I will
please.
just read it.
Yeah.
I will just read it. Shallow people will compare between Gaza and Ukraine, but their situation is different. And something from my mind, every war is different. Mm-hmm. I can explain that, but we will take our time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, important voices that we connect these 2 theaters. Yes, please.
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to return to this point on the information warfare, which I'm really glad that you brought up, and just ask, because one of the biggest issues in the new kinds of threats, such as information warfare, is the issue of disinformation for hire firms, which actually just, to come back to Dr. Ghafar, the connection you were making with the role of Israel as a rogue actor, a lot of disinformation for hire comes out of Israel in particular, but it's also something that comes out of Russia. My question is, how can the security architecture address this kind of issue? These are private actors. They're often operating transnationally. They're very hard to track. So what can be done from the perspective of the security architecture? Thank you.
And I think I'll put that on top of everything else. We have also, the incredible spread of AI technology, which is just mind-blowing for many of us. And we see now boots talking with boots and basically creating this kind of a sphere. From just my perspective, I'll tell you that the moment that the 20 drones crossed the Polish airspace in September, when the Russian attack happened, 45% of our info space claimed that these are Ukrainians. So we had it was combined, so there was an info attack and there was at the same time a physical attack, so these domains are actually naturally combined. We have, I think, 4 minutes, I don't see the clock anymore, so really 2 minutes per person, and I'll start this time with Adel because you were going last, so this time you're first.
But yeah, disinformation is something that's going to increase more and more, so we have to really answer it by having radical transparency on all fronts, and also protection of journalists. So if we look at the Ukraine-Russia war, there's been 20 journalists killed. In Gaza, there's been more than 300 journalists killed. If any of you, while in Doha, go visit the Al Jazeera studio, there's a mural of all of the dead journalists. And this mural keeps increasing bit by bit. So I think protection of journalists is critical, and attacks on journalism should be classified as a war crime and dealt with as a war crime.
Thank you. Þórdís, please. Javier and...
Yes, thank you. Well, I absolutely agree with these words. I mean, what do we need to do? I think if you look at the European societies at least, I would say that we need to improve our resilience. And being resilient is not only about, electricity and water supplies and so forth. It's also about, trust, that we continue to have enough trust towards fundamental institutions, towards media, that we continue to have media freedom. And that is why it is important to realize that the only goal of those players is to undermine the society from within. They do not care about any ideology. Their goal is not to make European citizens agree with their domestic politics. Their only goal is to make people angry and scared and so forth. So I think that is important. And then we also need a framework. We need some sort of rules. And if we can agree that fundamental human rights are actually for human beings, we can get a long way. And Maria Ressa and many, many others have written a lot about this. And I think it's time to find ways to do that.
Thank you, Javier. 1 minute and we
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just 2 quick words. One on the US withdrawing. I think it's more a rebalance than a withdrawal. I think the US, yes, indeed wants more from its partners, from the European partners and partners in different regions to do more for their security, but I think we can work in that new burden sharing and not necessarily think that the US is withdrawing. At least that's what's not happening in the NATO context, and we will continue to be a transatlantic alliance, and our strength comes actually from the transatlantic bond, regardless of how you balance the two powers. Second, on how you connect our security and the security in the Middle East and in different regions through our partnerships with our partners in the region. And we have partners in the Mediterranean from Mauritania to the Middle East, to the Gulf. We are trying to connect our efforts on capacity building, on artificial intelligence, on disinformation, working with their armed forces, interoperability exercises, training, border security, maritime security, lots of things that we as the most successful military alliance are trying to do with our partners in a two-way street where we can learn from their capabilities and they can learn also from our own.
Thank you, and Rob, the last word is yours.
So this is about pre-bunking, debunking, if it comes to disinformation. But there's another method as well, and that is flooding the zone with shit. Basically, there's so much nonsense out there. I spoke to a Danish professor on AI. 1/3 of what is available and is being searched through by AI is crap. And it is crap on purpose. So this is, we are living in a world where people think we are living in a free world, where everything is, that you find on internet is true, which it isn't. At the same time, we see that the Russians and the Chinese are cutting off their information space from us. So the Russians have cut off their internet from the World Wide Web and control basically what the Russians hear. We still want to be an open society, but it requires us to do much more to actually be stronger. And part of it is we have to continue to, or not, start to do maintenance to our democracies. We thought for so long it was such a good system it didn't need any maintenance. I think we are wrong. We need to invest in it again. We need to teach about this. We need to make sure that people understand that if we lose this, we lose a lot, and not just something. And therefore, I think this is much bigger than just disinformation and misinformation. This is about protecting the way we want to live our lives.
Thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause to this fantastic panelists. And of